Hi, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Katarna. Welcome to this Exemplary Catholic Leaders series. My special guest today is August Turak. He is a successful entrepreneur. You're going to hear about this. He is an award-winning writer. He writes on religious and business topics, and he's got some interesting publications that we'll talk about. He's also the founder of the August Turak Foundation, which is something interesting that we will talk about as well. So, August, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Henry. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So let's get right into the topic at hand. I'd like to begin with telling us about your faith journey. What's the story of your faith journey, August?
Well, it's a good question because what most people think of me as a businessman and a CEO and an entrepreneur who happen to have an interest in spirituality. I look at myself as a spiritual person who happened to get into business. I was ended up writing a book, my spiritual autobiography. It's called Not Less Than Everything: One Man's Quest for Spiritual Enlightenment. And when I was still in college, I basically went through an existential crisis, and I was asking the huge questions. What is the purpose of life? I started having, I was raised Catholic, but I started having doubts about the faith and blah, 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 blah. And I decided to dedicate my life to a spiritual quest and a spiritual search. So I actually dropped out of college after 3 years and went, got into things like Thomas Merton and traveling around the country trying to find wiser men than me to ask questions, and became celibate and developed a meditational practice, all that. So I was, really, really got into it. So my whole life has been, I like to talk a lot nowadays about the hero's journey, and the way in which the hero's journey relates to the spiritual quest. And I would say that my whole life has been a hero's being on the hero's journey, the quest for God.
It's a great quest, as you know. I mean, we both know it's the best and it's the only quest really that matters.
Mhm.
So in this journey, when you studied, Merton and all these other topics, was there a convergence towards something in particular after all those years of all that analysis?
Yes, what really I became very, very frustrated with the intellect. Um, Harry S. Truman supposedly said all he wanted for Christmas was a one-armed economist because he was sick of economists saying on this hand, but then again on the other hand. And it seemed like no matter what philosophy or whatever I studied, there was always another point of view, or there's always, but what about this? But what about that? And I discovered, and this is one of the things I really got into with Thomas Merton, is mysticism and the idea of a mystical experience. What's called in Christianity, it's called the unia mystica. An idea that you would have this mystical experience that would answer all your questions, and be a direct experience of God that would transcend the intellect. And I became absolutely fanatically convinced that this type of an experience would existed, and this is what I really centered my search on. Having a Father Christian who I hang out at this Catholic monastery, Mepkin Abbey, which is a Trappist monastery, and he calls me a phenomenologist because I want experience of God, not knowledge about, but the experience of God. So that became, and I also noticed that across faiths, no matter what religion you looked at, the Buddhists talked of nirvana, and the Zen talks of satori, and the yoga talks of samadhi, and the Jews have another words, and so every religious had this idea of some transcending experience, and that became that became the centerpiece of my life.
It's interesting, some of the people that we see here to come to us from the intellectual side, they come to the faith from the intellectual side. I'm talking about people who convert to the faith, and then there are others who come from that experiential side. They have a profound experience. They might be in adoration, or they might be sitting in a church, or they might be driving somewhere, and they have this profound experience. But you did yours deliberately. Then you searched,
Hmm.
researched, and you found the answer deliberately.
Hmm.
And and where, I mean, where will it take you, August? Do you think? Are you in a solid spot now, and where will it go from here?
Well, I'm going to put a plug in for my book, Not Less Than Everything, because what happened
Yes.
to me is in 1996, I had a skydiving accident where I shattered my ankle, and
Mm.
and it kicked off the mother of all dark nights of the soul. I had a 2 year um, dark night of the soul, where I went down and down and down and down into what looked like more and more despair.
Mm.
And then I ended up having, instead of what I was fearing, I actually had this incredibly profound spiritual experience. That was 1998. And I had suffered with depression all my life. And in writing this book, I actually examined that a lot of my spiritual searching was initiated by the fact that I got depressed, and I was, it was scary to get depressed, and I was looking for an answer to my depression. And since 1998 to this day, Henry, I've never had a day's depression. I've never had a day's anxiety, just boundless gratitude that just never seems to God, that never seems to get, I never seem to fill up. I seem to get more and more and more grateful. Um, and so, and on top of that, all of the things, these magical things just fell into place with my life. I mentor college students on spiritual issues, and one of my college students says, "You got to enter this essay contest with the Templeton Foundation." And I said, I've never written anything in my life. And they said, "You're always telling us to go for it. You got to enter this contest." Turned out, for 3,500 words or less, I had to answer the question, "What is the purpose of life?" The contest had been going on for almost 2 years. It was open internationally to previously published material, to professional writers. I had a week. And I sit down and I'm not getting anywhere. Another one of my students says, "Why don't you just write that story about Brother John, that Christmas story about you and Brother John? You're always telling us that story." So I wrote that story down and I related it to why I thought Brother John taught me the secret, the secret to the answer to the purpose of life. And I entered it and forgot about it. 6 months later, they called me up and said, "You won $100,000 grand prize. You went up against 10,000 essays from 47 countries and we chose yours." And that opened
Wow.
up my entire life as a writer. And I became a writer for Forbes, and I came out with a book called Business Secrets of Trappist Monks, etc. So it's all kinds of things just have fallen into place for me since I had that spiritual experience as well. I sold my business right before the 2000 crash. Everything has just been
Mm.
tremendous for me. Um, so that's my big thing. Is I'm really my message is of course, people say, "What is the purpose of life?" And I say the whole purpose of every human life, whether you agree with me or not, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong, is to be transformed from a selfish to a selfless person.
Absolutely. That's well said, and I'm glad you summarized it that way. I'd like to go back just for a minute to the
Sure.
depression part because a lot of people come to us at the Catholic CEO. They're running a business and they're down, they're depressed, they suffer from different things. And what would you say about that? And I know that's a long story, but what is there an answer to how can someone get out of depression? You,
Well, to me, I can only speak to it for myself, and
yes.
I can actually say it pretty quickly. What was the germ of my depression was, in a sense, a blessing,
Mhm.
because what became clear to me by the time I was 18 or 19 years old was that I was lucky enough that I had accomplishments. I was successful,
Yes.
and yet everything I'd have this. I called it. I kind of had an epiphany when I was 18 or 19 years old that eager anticipation followed by inevitable disappointment might become the pattern of my life. I always had this idea that if I could just get this, if I could just get this girl, I'd be happy. If I could just get this, I'd be happy. And then I would get the girl, and it was great, but that wasn't what I was looking for. And I now say that it was the greatest gift that I ever had, because really all my depression was God withdrawing the compensation from ordinary life in order to call me to something higher. I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with The Hound of Heaven, and it's
Mhm.
a story
Yes.
about a man who's being hounded by God, a poem. Francis Thompson wrote it. And he says, and God is constantly telling him, "Nothing will satisfy you unless you turn to me."
Right.
And I everything always ended up just leaving me flat, leaving me feeling like, is that it? Is this all there is? And when you're looking at your whole life and you're only a young man and you're saying, "My God, is this it? Is this all life is?"
Yeah.
And if
Just
the last 20 things I tried didn't do it, what makes me think the next 20 will?
that's it.
And that was a very, very depressing kind of feeling. So I'd have these big letdowns. And I think this happens to a lot of people in business, a lot of driven, successful people like me who keep, the old expression, somebody said I read somebody said, you climbed the longest ladder, except it was leaning against the wrong tree. And we climb up these ladders thinking, and I ended up saying it's enough would never seem to be enough. Whatever success I got, all it did was reveal an even higher mountain that still had to be climbed. So there was this overall sense of just exhaustion. So what I was trying to do was I was trying to find a religious satisfaction in a material accomplishment, and that's impossible.
Right, exactly. How many people we know, they ask the billionaires, how much is enough? Just a little bit more,
Right.
That's for a little bit more. So Augustine, you came through this all, you have faith, and you sold your business and you've created this foundation. What's that all about? What's going on at the foundation?
Well, what I'm trying to do is, I feel like the Beatles, the Beatles said, "I love to turn you on." Actually, it's this may sound arrogant to you, Henry, but I feel like I have more than faith. Carl Jung was asked one time, he said, "Do you believe in God?" And he said to the interviewer, he said, "You're asking me the wrong question." And she said, "Well, what's the right question?" He said, "Do I know there's a God?" And she said, "Okay, do you know there's a God?" And Jung said, "Yes." And so I feel like as if there is a way to know there's a God. And so I'm trying to turn people on to this mystical quest that I was talking about before. But I'm doing it through a nonprofit foundation. I call it the August Turak Foundation. And I donate all the money that I make from I don't really, for my books, any royalties and stuff, goes into the nonprofit. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to offer people a vision of higher meaning and purpose in a world that so many people find bereft of meaning and purpose. You're speaking of depression, for example. 40%, Henry, 40% of incoming freshmen at elite universities are already on antidepressants. Last year, the CDC said 67% of our teenage girls report being constantly sad, and 30% say they've seriously considered suicide. So we are dealing with a spiritual crisis that people are trying to, they don't realize it's a spiritual crisis, and they're trying to solve it with drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And this is what I'm trying to address, is saying, listen, what you really want is to be selfless. And the only true selflessness is what St. Paul called kenosis, the self-emptying process that he talked about Jesus going through. So that's what I'm trying to do with my books and my lecturing and my getting on here even with you. We're trying to turn people on to the spiritual quest, the hero's journey.
God bless you for that whole effort. So August, my next question for you is going to be about, what do you see out there? And you've described it with the college students and the young women and all of these problems, these challenges. What advice do you have for families trying to raise, let's say, families of college-aged children or soon to be? What would you say to business people? What would you say to young people? Give us, there must be at some point a prescription here that you've come up with.
I mean, to me, the best thing you can possibly do is you have to, first of all, you have to put your faith first. Seek first the kingdom of God.
Yes.
And that means, you find a faith community, and then you don't it's not something your parish is, or whatever it is not something you just swap out because you'd like a bigger house in a bigger neighborhood, nicer neighborhood, or you want another job in another city that'll pay you $10,000 more a year. You've got to be willing to make the sacrifices for community, because I'm not a big fan, to say it to put it lightly, of Hillary Clinton. But she took a lot of flack when she said it takes a village to raise a child. It does take a community. It doesn't help you if you're not having R-rated movies on your TVs, if they can go next door and watch R-rated movies on your next door neighbor's TV.
Exactly.
You have to be very, very circumspect about the people you combine yourself with. You have to find the best people, and you have to work hard. I've worked all my life at building communities, and they're extremely hard. And that's why even the monasteries are failing, because people don't want to make the sacrifices the community requires. We want community to be there when we need it, But the rest of the time, we want to be able to say, oh, well, don't count on me. I won't be there Friday night or whatever. So I say the most important thing you need to do is, of course, you work on your family, but you put your faith at the absolute center. You put the quality of your life at the absolute center, and you seek first the kingdom of heaven and let everything else take care of itself. I actually wrote this book called Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, and one of the big things I talk about is that um, for the monks who are very successful business people, everything that we think of as business is a byproduct. It's a trailing indicator of living the right kind of life. We don't have to compromise because people like Warren Buffett have proven that actually being honest and having high integrity and having morals and doing the right thing is good business. It's not a sacrifice you have to make. It's good for business. And the more selfless you are, I like to point out that people want to be leaders. I said, what is job one for leader? You don't become a leader because you want to get ahead. Your job as a leader is to get other people promoted. And the irony and the paradox is the better job you do at getting other people promoted, the faster you get promoted. I was a very, very successful salesman. I was on the cover of Selling Magazine. I said, every great salesman knows that the more he forgets about himself, forgets about his commissions, forgets about his product, and fanatically works on helping his customer, the more product he moves, the more money he makes. It's the trailing indicator. It's the byproduct.
Yeah.
So if you seek first the kingdom of God, and that's where your faith comes in, because you have to believe this and act on it, even though you haven't seen the results necessarily yet.
Is that the catalyst for, like a young person goes off to college and he's out away from this community, this group, the Catholic faith, his family. Suddenly he or she is thrust into the mix, and it could be a Catholic college or not. But the point is, that's when a lot of people lose the faith. And so are you saying that this brings them back at some point, or is it foundational? What's the connection to that?
Well, first of all, it's foundational. I mean, what always cracks me up is when people say, "I'm going to wait until my kids are 18 and let them decide on their own religion, etc." I say, well, what are you going to do? Wait until they're 18 to decide what language they're going to speak?
Right.
I mean, that's just a cop out. Religion is essential. However, I will say that what I found, and I've spent 30 years working on college campuses. I worked on Duke University and University of North Carolina. Young people today, maybe even some older people, need more than the rosary and going to mass on Sunday. They need a deeper understanding of they need help on facing the psychological problems they're dealing with. And the traditional idea that you go to the priest and you say you've got all these psychological, sexual issues and stuff, and he says, say 3 Hail Marys. And that isn't going to cut it. There has to be a component to the religious experience, which is far deeper than rote prayers, saying rosaries. I mean, I love the rosary. I'm a big fan of the rosary, but there has to be a deeper, and this is what I think young people. I mean, I remember even my brother said, he said, I hate to say this, he said, but I think the mass is boring. He said, I have a really hard time. He said, I'm having a really hard time hooking in. Where do I hook in? Now, the interesting thing, my brother ended up hooking in through a men's group at his parish.
Yes.
So they've got a very dynamic men's group where there's 25 or 30 men that are meeting once a week, and they're really getting down and dirty on the issues in their lives, and they're with their marriages and their children and their doubts of and especially I think one of the things that the church needs to be more open with is that that having doubts and having questions doesn't make you a bad Catholic.
Yeah, this is it's so true. Years ago, I had a 4-day annual backpacking trip in the Canadian Rockies, and I invited all my godchildren, my own children, nieces, nephews, and their families, and we'd have anywhere from 1 to 2 dozen people on a 4-day backpacking trip in the Rockies. And our parish priest always came with us 4 days. Mass in the wilderness every day. He carried his own mass kit plus his pack, and we helped. But the beauty of that was that he was there chit-chatting with the kids, talking, confessions out in the field, 100 yards away from the mass site. He'd sit on a rock and hear confessions, but he would talk, counsel, dialogue, spiritual direction. It was fantastic. That's an example maybe of what you're talking about, but I tried to put that into practice, and he loved coming with us because and that's why today, my children are faithful Catholics. And I attribute the fact that the priest did more than they saw him on the altar. They saw him in the sacraments. They saw him as a human being, hiking with them, exhaustion, the usual.
I started an organization, a student, and that's what it was. I gave some lectures, and it just spontaneously grew up. It was the kids named it the Self Knowledge Symposium. And we concentrated on self-knowledge because self-knowledge is an important aspect of every religious tradition. And it gave us a way of transcending doctrinal differences and really but then I also said, hey, we're not going to sit here and just introspection. I said, we're going to do things and learn about ourselves by watching ourselves in action, seeing ourselves under pressure. If we have to put on a lecture, or we're doing something for the community, we're doing something, and we're relying on each other to do stuff, and then we either do it or we don't do it. This gives us, ways of seeing ourselves in action. Pressure doesn't just build character, it reveals character. So if you really want to know who you are, put yourself under pressure. So we would do it as a group and as a community. And the kids loved it. Interestingly enough, Henry, I ended up getting in trouble because my kids were so motivated and excited about what we were doing. And all the other kids all the other chaplains were failing miserably. And so they decided that I must be feeding them the Kool-Aid. I must be a cult leader or something, because the other alternative is that they weren't getting it done. Another thing I would say that is really important in helping young people is you have to be transparent with them. You have to be able to be open up the kimono, so to speak, and share with them your doubts and your problems, the things you went through, and not just be the person at the front of the room who's saying, thanks for sharing. Oh, isn't that nice? No. You have to be the person who's willing to say, go first. I call it going first. You have to be the person who goes first. If you want vulnerability, if you want to see people open up, you've got to open up with them.
It's brilliant because it's, as with so many things in life, it's really, I don't want to oversimplify, but it's a simple message, isn't it? Be first, go first.
Right. But it takes courage because it takes a tremendous amount of courage because, you're opening yourself up and you're, telling your, sometimes your dirty secrets or whatever, and you're putting there's the possibility that all these kids are going to say yuck and get up and walk out and say, I don't want to. I realized it was a very vulnerable situation because I fundamentally realized after doing it for years with these college students that what I was really doing was standing up in front of them and saying, listen, if you take my advice, you're going to end up just like me. How do you like that? How do you like that? And if they all get up and leave, they're basically voting with their feet and saying, we don't want to end up like you.
Yeah.
Most people don't want to put themselves in that kind of a vulnerable situation.
Yeah. What a subtext on going off to college. I love what you've said, and thank you for saying all of this. What about, can you tell young people, here's what you're going to face when you go to college? You're going to face this question. Somebody's going to criticize you on this. How do you get them ready for that, August?
Boy, I wish I had a really good answer for that, Henry. The climate on campuses has turned so anti-religious, so politically correct, for want of a better way of putting it, that you almost have to be a Superman to resist the peer pressure. I had a girl, and this was many years ago now. She's gone on to go to Stanford Law School, and she then clerked for the Supreme Court Justice, and now she's a very successful married lawyer. And she asked to talk to me after class one day, walked me to my car, and I said, And I said, no, how can I help you, Erica? And she said, I don't think if a boy buys me a pizza, I have to sleep with him. I said, well, where did you get the idea that, he said, that's,
Who said you had to?
yeah, he said, that's what everybody on this campus thinks. This was Duke University too, by the way.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I said, then I went to talk to the women's studies professors here and asked their advice. And they told me I have sexual hangups. I said, Erica, you're the only girl on this campus that doesn't have sexual hangups.
Right.
You're the only sane one. Stick to your guns, She came to me years later. She happened to be, this was after she'd graduated from Stanford. She was going to Duke for some alumni thing. And she came and spent a couple hours. And on the way out, she threw her arms around me and she started to cry. And she said, you don't hear from me very often. She said, but I think of your advice every single day. She said, thank you so much for helping me. And I found myself in that situation many, many, many times. I mean, these kids are overwhelmed by the peer pressure and especially, so much of the trauma, so much of this 40% of them on depression, on antidepressants is caused by getting into a sex too early, especially that's where the girls. I never met any girls. I've been working on college campuses on spiritual stuff when I was in college at University of Pittsburgh. And it was only in the late 90s and in early 2000s that I started meeting all these girls who were cutters, cutting themselves, burning themselves with cigarettes, pulling their hair out, bulimic, anorexic, all these terrible behaviors. And when I would dig down into them, they were almost always had to do with getting into sex and allowing themselves to be used sexually, and the low self-esteem that came out of that, and self-hatred and guilt and all this stuff that or having had 3 abortions by the time they're 19 or whatever. And this is the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about. I remember Dean Williman was my faculty advisor. He was at the Duke Chapel. He was the dean of the Duke Chapel. And he told me one time that he was addressing the entire freshman, all the parents for the freshman class. And he said, this woman said, what is the biggest single problem you face with our children? And he said, I screamed at them, your divorces. And when I worked with these college kids, Henry, and I did it for over 20 years. I mean, these kids were, especially the Duke students, I mean, they could speak 3 languages. They could play a musical instrument. They were straight A students. They had 1600s on their SATs. And I would see, and they would be absolutely crying like babies in our classes because of divorces and because of sexual stuff, having had an abortion or, I had one girl screaming at a boy in one of my classes, you killed my baby, you killed my baby. Because she had an abort, he had pressured her into having an abortion, this is the undercurrent of all this stuff that nobody wants to talk about because it's not cool. So I don't know. I don't have I mean, it's almost like I'd want to have Bill Gates's money so I could do what some of these guys are doing, which are supposedly starting new universities, different colleges, with different kinds of values. Because I really don't have a magic bullet answer to your question about, I don't know what I would think if I, trying to send my kids to some of these college campuses today.
Well, I think what we sense from you today, yeah, we could talk longer. We could talk much longer. We're gonna wrap this up in a moment here because of our format. But August, you're actually throwing yourself into it. You're stepping up. You're doing it. You're going first. So that's and you're putting God first. So God bless you for that effort and the efforts that you're making, because somewhere in there the answer will come and you will influence lives, I'm sure, and I think you are. Tell us where we can find your writings. You have books. I was at your website today. Where do we find your writings, and where do we book you for a talk and that sort of thing?
Well, you go to my website. It's August, like the month, August Turak, T as in Tom, URAK. That's one word, August Turak, and .com, and that's my website. I'll give a real quickly show the my books here. This is my Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. It was published by Columbia Business School, which I'm very proud of. And this is Brother John, a monk, a pilgrim, and the purpose of life. And I don't have the other book right in front of me right now, but it's called Not Less Than Everything, One Man's Quest for Spiritual Enlightenment. It's my attempt to emulate my hero, Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain.
Exactly. Right on. Yeah. Good for you. Well, August, thanks again so much. God bless you in your work, and we will talk again because there's so many other topics we could hit on this one. So thank you for being.
Absolutely, Henry. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Very welcome.